If you walk around any cemetery, you will see names and dates that may not mean anything to you, but the people buried there probably have deep connections within the surrounding community. In this first story, a group of Fort Hays students did research on a few African American people buried in the Greenlawn Cemetery. Through that experience, the students learned valuable lessons about historic research, genealogy, and storytelling. Let's head to Greenlawn Cemetery for more on that story.
Reverend Ezekiel Fields was born free in 1795. He was born in Virginia and was one of 11 children of the Fields family. And census records show that Ezekiel Fields, he moved to southern Columbus around 1828. He must have been in his late 20s or early 30s around then. He was listed as a day laborer, but was also a circuit rider, meaning he would perform ministry duties in rural churches, so things like marriages, baptisms.
I teach American history to 10th graders at Fort Hays, and as part of that history is African American history.
In the early 1800s, Ohio required free people of color from slave states to be legally registered or they couldn't settle in Ohio. They were required to pay a surety bond of $500, and they also had to have 2 citizens vouch for their character. $500 in 1800 was not exactly easy to come by. It's around $10,000 to $11,000 in today's money.
We've done a lot of community work, bringing students out of the classroom and into the community to bring not only Columbus history alive, but in doing so bring American history alive. Perhaps shedding new light on how they perceive their own community, to realize that it has a deeper, richer history, a deeper, richer past.
In the late 1830s, African American members of the Columbus First Baptist Church separated and formed the Second Baptist Church, and that is where Ezekiel Field became the first minister. That's where he became Reverend Ezekiel Field. The Second Baptist Church at some point split into 2 memberships, and one of those memberships was solely dedicated to carrying out the Underground Railroad.
I am a member of the Franklin County Genealogical and History Society African American Interest Group, and so since 2016, our group had been doing research on African Americans, the pioneers.
This is Wilbur King. He was born in 1866 during the Civil War. His father was a sharpshooter for the Union Army and died in the war.
The myth for African Americans who do research is that we were not included on the census and we were not included in the history books. That's a myth. African Americans are included on census. We may have been underrepresented.
King became a lawyer in 1896. His skills were so widely recognized that the Ohio Supreme Court waived the customary probation period required of new lawyers, meaning he could immediately start practicing law.
We decided to do a walking tour using high school kids, and would they like to help us become public historians? And their response has been very positive and overwhelming.
Clayton Greaves was born in 1855 in Virginia, a slave. Greaves was known as a Buffalo Soldier, a term of respect given to them by native tribes to describe their dark skin, curly hair, and fighting spirit.
And the stories started coming out, and they were varied and they were richer than I could have ever imagined.
The Fort Hays Historical Society is a group of students who really does care about our history. We value all the people in it and we want to learn more.
Next to Poindexter's Lot, there's an important bench which under it has bricks that were saved from the demolition of Poindexter Village. These bricks were laid by Fort Hays students and their teacher Vinely, which is really important because Poindexter Village was the first public housing and was also dedicated by Franklin D. Roosevelt. So one of the things I think that was important to mention is our high schoolers' motivations to do this, because not anyone will go for summer break and then choose to come out here in a hot, sweaty day. I chose to do this because I thought it was interesting. I'm interested in it, but I'm also motivated to learn more about the past. And I'm also motivated to learn about US history more.
Washington Townsend, he was actually the slave of the former president of the United States, Andrew Jackson, and he escaped around the age of 17. He heard about a new university that was being started, which was the Ohio State University, and he applied as the role of custodian, which he got hired to, and he was one of the first 39 people to work at the Ohio State University. He was actually really good close friends with the president of the Ohio State University, and they would often be seen having really deep and meaningful conversations.
The question that we can answer through this project is that African Americans are documented, and you can research them, and you can get the beauty of their lives in records that they provide. So you can learn about employment, you can learn about through their church histories, you can learn about them through their social networks. And I think in all of the stories that were selected today, those things have been recounted in that way.
At the time that Washington Townsend passed away, the president had already passed away. And as you can see, it's the only grave that's risen here. And the son felt like it was needed because he was so important to the university to give him this grave, and he had paid for it out of his own pocket.
The earliest burial of an African American resident in Greenlawn was of Arthur Boak. Stories told he was born January 19th, 1803, and had been left by his mother as a newborn with Sarah Sullivan. His mother was a fugitive slave fleeing capture through the network of the Underground Railroad. Sarah raised baby Arthur with her sons Joseph, William, and Michael.
I was impressed because it takes strength to get up and share. You know, you're in those formative years, you're not sure about that. And it's great exercise to be able to study something and then present it, and to present it from their perspective. They're putting value on their own thoughts and own processes.
No, not at all. William, Lucas's son, he thought of Arthur as a brother. He loved him to death and would do anything for him.
They personalized it and brought the people alive. I think, as a genealogist, that's what we want to happen. And we want the family narratives to be told, but we want them to be told in the context of the setting and the time period. I remember Amir was saying, when she talked about Arthur Boak, she mentioned that William loved him and saw him as a brother. And I think that's the kind of narrative that you want.
Arthur Boak died before Greenlawn was established, and his body was moved to Greenlawn from Pioneer Cemetery, along with Lucas Sullivan and family members.
I think for them to have their eyes opened to asking questions about anything. The important thing about dealing with what I call is difficult history, and that is a branch of history, is maybe not the conclusion you're going to come up with, but it's the questions you ask to get there and the awareness that you'll develop. And that, to me, is really what critical thinking is all about. And that's what we all want our children to be, is critical thinkers.
If you've ever attended the memorial tournament that happens every May, you might wonder why it almost always rains. Some people believe it could be attributed to a curse of a Wyandot chief that frequented the area in the early 19th century. Could it be true? We head to Dublin to find out.
Jim Leatherlips, it's an unusual name, but it's a real story and a real person, is that right?
It is, it is. He lived along here, and in fact, according to my family, he would come down here many times with some of the Wyandots into this spring. and they would sit on the hillside and tell stories.
Was he a leader in the Wyandotte?
He was a Wyandotte chief. In fact, he signed the Greenville Treaty in 1795.
What do we know about the execution?
6 Indians that came here to put Leatherlips on trial, which was a mock trial. They wanted to get rid of him. As you remember, Tecumseh was forming his coalition. And when Tecumseh was forming his coalition, his brother sometimes would meddle, Tenskwatawa, the prophet. And so he decided to end Leatherlips' life, and maybe they could get the Wyandottes who were under Leatherlips here to join his confederation. Well, it backfired. And after the execution, then the Wyandottes actually fought against Tecumseh in the War of 1812.
The Sells family was here. They were some of the original settlers of Dublin, and their descendants went on to have the Sells Circus, right?
5 Sells brothers were actually at the execution of Leatherlips. So between the 5 Sells brothers, and there was an Elias Lewis from Worthington and a Peter Millington from downriver, so there was at least 7 witnesses. I think if Leatherlips would have let them know that this is false, I'm not a witch doctor, and I don't want to die, I think there'd been a hand-to-hand combat that day. I believe the Sells boys would have broke in, and I really think that Leatherlips, he didn't want any interference because he knew that Tecumseh, or at least his brother, the prophet, would have brought Indians over here and tried to wipe out Sells settlement. I will always believe that Leatherlips was more of a hero than what we give him credit to be, because he stopped the Sells boys from fighting.
Do we know where the name Leatherlips came from?
Well, they think it came from the fact that he never told a lie. The settlers trusted him. And as Elias Lewis once said years after this execution, the hardest thing I ever did was see that good man put to death.
And your great-grandfather was that custodian of the grave, and the grave has been in the family's care since then.
Yes, Joseph Thompson died in 1862, but he's the one who started to protect the grave of Leatherlips. After the execution, the Indians left, and then Joseph later, he backfilled all of that with rocks. And those rocks then covered the grave of Leatherlips.
And that brings us to the Curse of Leatherlips. What is it and how did it start?
After Leatherlips was executed and the grave was taken care of, okay, we also had a son of Joseph named Samuel. And so they formed a club in Columbus, and it was called the Wyandotte Club. It was a group of gentlemen that loved history. This membership club got so excited they voted to put the monument, which is up there now. Now this was when it was still nothing more than just a pile of rocks in the woods. They decided to clean the area up, and when they did, they accidentally uncovered the remains of Leatherlips. They had to lower those remains now down to a proper depth. That's when the rumors started about the curse.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and it seems like the more we learn about Leatherlips, the more there is to find out. So thanks for sharing your family's story with us. So that's the history of the real-life figure named Leatherlips. According to local urban legend, his curse is the reason there always seems to be a dark cloud hanging over the memorial tournament. And by that, I mean rain. To find out how much, if any, of this is true, I met with Ben Gelber, who's examined the evidence. Well, Ben, we know you know about meteorology and the weather, but it turns out you know about Leatherlips too. You've studied this character.
Yeah, because so often questions come up, is there anything to the lore of Leatherlips and rain in Muirfield? So I went back and investigated the climate records to see if we could tie in number of rainy days with tournament days. May and early June have the greatest number of rainy days. It rains a little bit more than 60% of the time.
So as you looked at the data before and after the 1970s when the tournament starts, what kind of change did you see? Was there any?
One thing that we have looked at is the change in the amount of moisture in the air. We're clearly having more rainy days and more days with heavy rain, say compared to the 1930s through the 1960s. We've gotten progressively wetter. As the climate has warmed, the oceans have warmed, there's more available moisture in the air, conducive to showers and storms, which happens to coincide with the initiation of the tournament.
So you're telling me there was actually less humidity in the good old days?
For the most part, yes. And we use dew points as a measure of the amount of moisture in the atmosphere, and also the number of days with southerly breezes coming off the Gulf of Mexico. That has increased significantly in the past 25 years. So we're having even more rainy days during our rainiest time of the year traditionally.
Ben, so in your opinion, yes or no, is there a curse?
As a meteorologist, I do not believe there is a curse, partly because of the history doesn't quite match up. The area that he hunted is on the opposite side of the river from Muirfield. And secondly, yes, it's unusual to have that many rainy days and heavy rainfall days, but there's a climate signal and the time of year that all allow this to fall within the realm of natural variability. or bad luck.
Curses foiled again.
Curses foiled again, I love it.
Thanks a lot.
There are a lot of old cemeteries in Columbus. In fact, one of the oldest is Union Cemetery along Olentangy River Road, which has several Columbus legends buried there, including Woody Hayes and Dave Thomas. But just because the cemetery was established in 1847 doesn't mean people weren't buried there before that. Historian Mary Rodgers uncovers some of those stories with a tour of their cemetery archives.
Union Cemetery's oldest burial is 1806. It is Balzer Hess. He is one of the original pioneers of this area. And that was the beginning of what became a graveyard in this area. So not only did the Hess family use it for burials, but other family and friends from a more extended area began to use that cemetery space. But it wasn't until the 1840s that Union Cemetery was actually founded. Back in the 1840s, there would have been a group of these graveyards. Most of the time, a graveyard is attached to a church. Cemeteries that were not attached to church would have come together as a union of cemeteries to share expenditures. Now, the association back in 1848 most likely would have been a part of that union. And it's my understanding that when that union broke up, that Union Cemetery kept that name, and that's the name that is chosen when the official association begins in the 1870s. It's not until 1879 that we actually have documentation. This is the very first minute from the official minute book of the association. It starts by saying that there is a desire to establish the association and that they are going to have an official meeting at the Baptist Church here in Clinton Township. I've pulled a map from 1872 to try to get an understanding of where that church might have been, and there is a church that is right across the street from the established graveyard. In 1878, they agreed to actually elect officers and begin the association. What they're doing is making a business out of this cemetery operation. And as a result, most of the records that we have here are going to be accounting and land management records. We're keeping track of what kind of revenue we take in, where we actually inter people so that we know exactly how much space we haven't used and what we might be able to sell. So a lot of the early records are actually what would be certificates of ownerships. Not a lot of burial records because families back then would have taken care of their own burials. They would have also taken care of their own markers, and there wouldn't have been a lot of rules and regulations associated with that. As the years progress, you start to see where the Cemetery Association, in order to be able to maintain the cemetery, needs to start putting together some rules. One rule would be that they eliminate the ability for a family to fence in their particular part of the cemetery. Another one would be whether or not you're able to do an internment on Sunday. Dogs in the cemetery become an issue. Horses in the cemetery become an issue. And these are all things that would be associated with the just growth of both the cemetery and the number of people who are visiting the cemetery. An early issue that comes up is the fact that it is cold in Ohio. And it is not possible for people to be buried during the winter months. They decide they need what is called a dead house, a storage location where they can keep people until the weather warms enough to actually be able to do an internment. This book shows us where the cemetery decides that it's time to remove this particular element of the cemetery. So we have these great photographs that would have been taken in the summer of 29, where they are memorializing the dead house because they're getting ready to demolish it. In the 1920s, the cemetery would have had about 48 acres of land, and most of this land would have been close to Doddridge Street, off of Olentangy River Road. As they expand, they're purchasing farmland from the farmers that are in this area. So Mr. Ackerman, Mr. Hess, these would have been second or even third generation pioneer families that are still owning land in this area. We start to purchase land moving northward, closer to what we see as Riverside Hospital today. Ultimately, we purchase about 75 acres of land on the east side of Olentangy River Road. Then we jump over to the west side of Olentangy River Road in the late 1930s, early 1940s. And at that point, we purchase almost the same amount of land. We're purchasing land that may already have buildings or structures on it, in some cases houses, in some cases barns. So we may take a house and use it for the superintendent for a period of time. We have used barns for tool sheds and things like that, but ultimately we need to clear the land of these pieces of property. As the cemetery records mature, we can also see where current events are being documented as part of the cemetery's business records. Here in 1910, they're relocating a cemetery from the Clintonville area over to Union Cemetery. This is because that property is going to be used for houses and schools and the development of the Beachwald area. Here in 1918, we see the impacts of the influenza situation that was here in Columbus. Pneumonia, influenza, pneumonia. A lot of times we'll have people who come and visit and they want to see if we have death certificates for their loved ones. Those are documents that are maintained by the Department of Health. What we would have is what's called a transit permit. This is a document that a funeral director would obtain that allows him to actually bring us an individual for burial. When I first started to work here, I wasn't sure how often we would interact with these older records. But the reality is that I find reason to be interacting with these records on a daily basis. Right now at Union Cemetery, we have over 80,000 people here. So knowing exactly where everybody is, being able to get visitors to the right place, this is part of our day-to-day effort. And we use these records to make sure that we can answer those questions to the best of our ability.
Curious C-Bus is WOSU's project where you submit your questions about our region, its people, or its history, and we assign a reporter or producer to investigate it. Today's question comes from one curious viewer who wants to know more about one of Columbus's most unusual cemeteries. She asks, what is the history of the Insane Cemetery? And are there really body parts buried there? In Columbus's Hilltop neighborhood, there are actually two small cemeteries with plaques that read Old Insane and Penal Cemetery. Their story goes back to Ohio's first treatment center for mental illness and in fact the first state-supported hospital ever, the Ohio Lunatic Asylum. It was approved by the state in 1835 and built on East Broad Street about a mile from the State House. Tragically, the building was destroyed in 1868 by a fire that killed 6 patients. Instead of rebuilding there, the new hospital would be set on 300 acres along West Broad Street. When the hospital opened in 1877, it was known as the Columbus Hospital for the Insane. It is said to have been the largest building in the United States until that title was taken by the Pentagon. The building was designed in a style advocated by renowned psychiatrist Thomas Story Kirkbride. Its sprawling floor plan sought to promote a healing environment filled with fresh air and natural light. Originally, the building was designed to treat about 850 patients, but reportedly housed almost 3,000 by 1935. Over the years, doctors treated patients with what were considered the best therapies of the time, including lithium, lobotomies, and electroshock therapy. By the 1970s, the building was falling into disrepair and becoming increasingly expensive to maintain. Despite efforts by preservationists to save the Victorian architecture, the massive hospital was completely demolished in the early 90s. Patients who died at the hospital and whose families didn't have the resources for burial are likely those buried on the property in Hilltop. The state also buried inmates from the Ohio Penitentiary. Many of the headstones are in bad shape, marked with serial numbers or read unknown. But at least one victim of the 1868 Asylum fire is known to be buried there. One headstone that has sparked interest among visitors is marked Specimens. There's a lot of speculation online about what might be buried there, but the truth is we don't know. Parts of cadavers used for medical research is a likely answer, but for the time being, it'll have to remain a mystery.
Do you have a question for Curious C-Bus? Head to wosu.org/curious to submit your idea. Your question could become the next Curious C-Bus story.
Thanks for being with us. And remember, you can catch all our episodes on columbusneighborhoods.org. Plus, see our stories on the WOSU mobile app. And you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll see you back here next week on Columbus Neighborhoods.